Hi guys, I'm Marianne van Zyl and I'm a life coach, and I have a passion to assist people in dealing with toxic thinking, but also to have empathic ownership on their life with boundaries, and also to deal with conflict in a much more healthier way. So today, now, I want to speak to you guys about first things first. We start with those toxic thinking. So in this unfortunate circumstance we are in with COVID-19, but so much other situations in our life that creates a lot of stress and even fear. And I really want to engage with you today around dealing with those kind of experiences. So thinking about those kind of thoughts that runs through our mind. So often, like at the moment, we go to the shops and we see the masks and we see the frantic buying, or we read about the news, but also even in daily life. For instance, when you go to those meetings where you sit there, you don't necessarily feel that you have a voice, or that even if you speak up and say something, it might be criticized, or otherwise, perhaps you are leading a team or you are needing to make decisions when things are tough. And all those kind of situations are quite anxiety-creating situations. It can even create fear within us. And I want to tell you today, it's completely normal. And there is a healthy and supportive way that we can help our body and our brain to help us guide through those kind of emotions and responses that happen to us. So let me explain. So I want to specifically speak about the mind and the body connection that happens to us when we have fearful reactions or anxious reactions to situations that we feel is outside of our control. And what happens to our mind or our thinking, as well as to our emotions, and thus then to our body. So big picture first, I want to highlight that there is two ways in which we can grow through these kind of situations, so that we can use these situations as learning experiences and not getting stuck and even depressed in these kind of fearful like activating events or situations we find ourselves in everyday life, not necessarily in a pandemic like we are in, but in everyday life. So there's two states that we go in. So we're either in a normal calmer state where we can follow the more rational route that our mind or our brain wants to operate at, and usually then we have access to a lot of information that helps us create a perception of the current reality that is more healthy and a lot more real. But the moment we are experiencing a threat, we often get into our more irrational routes, and that create often some exaggerated emotional responses, and then can cause us to behave irrationally. So what we want to do in these situations is to have an understanding that there are things that runs through our mind in that moment that might not be true. Like, that's what it is called for as irrational. That's what irrational means. So that is what is happening. So we either have a rational thinking pattern running in our mind, or we have an irrational thinking pattern running in our mind. And guys, this is where it gets a little difficult and unhealthy, is when that irrational thinking pattern is triggered in a fearful or a dominating or threatening experience. And when we allow, I'm gonna say that again, when we allow that irrational thinking to then take hold of us, so we think it, we rethink it, we think it becomes, so once we begin to think about it, it's actually like feeding it, and the more we feed it, the more real it becomes to us in our mind. So we create our own reality in that moment. And the thing about that is that if that is our irrational threat response, and I'm going to share a little bit later why that is a irrational threat response, is the more we feed that irrational threat response, the more we will then feel threatened, and the more we will behave in perhaps irrational ways. So that is we want to understand what is the trigger behind that irrational thinking. so that we can unlearn what is not the truth about us. Yes, unlearn what is not the truth about us, and we need to learn. So there's two things that we need to do to grow, and to understand that our mind is based in a certain way. So we are wired, our brain is wired in a certain way, and with neuroscience that has showed us that there is no mind, no brain that does not have a massive capacity for potential. So that means that there isn't a brain on this earth that doesn't have potential, that every single brain, it's just us, it's the person with the will, the soul, that is not accessing the brain in the way it can be. So yeah, I want to tell you today, we need to understand how do we access our brain's rational capacity. Full capacity is to unlearn what is not the truth. So let me use an example. For instance, let me use the COVID-19 as an example. So often we have a fear response to the uncertainty of where is this taking us as a society, but also the uncertainty of your own safety. So it's a very primitive threat and fear response that there's a part in our brain called the amygdala that responds. Okay, and that's like the little hero in our brain that comes to play when we are threatened. So it's a very normal part of our mind and the way we live, but it's survival. So that's the sole purpose of the amygdala, is to help us survive. So when we walk in front of a car, for instance, for accident, I'm walking with my friend with a cup of coffee, and we don't look across this. We want to cross the street, and we're not looking carefully. We're chatting, and all of a sudden I step into the road, and she yells and she says "car," and I all of a sudden realize the car is much closer than I thought, and I jump out of the way. That is the amygdala responding. Now, just like I jumped now, it wasn't very gracious, okay? But that's not the point. So the point of the amygdala is to act fast, not gracefully. So gracefully would be our rational route. Remember, our rational route. The amygdala is our irrational route. It's not about grace. It's not about being correct. It forfeits accuracy for what? For speed. So the thing is that we often, if we start responding out of that threat response, we forfeit accuracy, guys, for speed. So if we become fearful, that's why people become panicky, and they behave in ways they wouldn't otherwise. They would become excessively obsessive about buying toilet paper and even be rude with each other in the shops. So just normalizing that situation. So just helping us and have an understanding so that we can have empathy for each other and not judge each other in these times. It's not about saying there's bad people and there's good people. We all have the potential to be good people. It's just sometimes in that state, we are doing the best we can with the internal resources we are making available for ourselves. And when we have not walked a journey thoroughly about our own awareness and having an understanding of my own identity and who I am, having a better understanding of your own story and what threatens you, what makes you feel fearful or even dominated or even unvalued or disrespected. What are those kind of things that trigger us into feeling a sense of an identity crisis or an insecure situation? If we have a better understanding of that, we can manage those kind of reactions in us much better. So let me help you understand by this drawing of mine. So I usually draw this to make us understand how do our mind work. So this is a iceberg. And so we all know about a physical iceberg. The biggest part of an iceberg is underneath the water. You know, there's the small part that's above the water, and that's like a metaphor. It's a very good metaphor to understand how do our psyche or our consciousness work. So to see that the things that's on top of the water, it's our behavior. It's what we say and do. So behavior is what we say and what we do, and that's usually what we see in people. We see their harsh frown, or we see or hear the words that they speak to us, or we see their body language, and we make assumptions on those behavior, and we start feed those assumptions into our thinking patterns, and from our belief structure we start making sense of, oh, I think they're angry at me, oh, did I do something wrong? Yes, that must be. So I must now I must do my very best. I must perform. I must be better. You must cope. I must calm down. And then you're behaving out of that almost nervous energy, activating a little bit of the amygdala, the fight and flight response, and causing you to not really engage with the situation from a real, authentic space. Why? Because you did not stop and check the assumption to remember that the behavior that you're seeing in the other person responding towards you is their behavior. So as you can see here, when somebody behaves, it is out of what they believe is happening, and out of the thinking pattern that they are perceiving and making, out of the emotions that they then experience and feel, causing them to behave in a certain way. And it's not about you. It's not about who you are. So people do not behave out of who they people do not behave out of who you are. People behave out of who they are. So and that's often something that we forget. We immediately become insecure, we immediately become angry, or we immediately become offended, or etc. when we interpret other people's behavior saying something about us, when in actual fact other people's behaviors say more about them and who they are than it says about who we are. So the thing here is, if we can start managing how we are feeling, understanding what is this feeling, where does it come from, so that I can realize, hey, you know what? No, nothing in me does not have value. My brain has full potential just like this other person. So now whether they are rude or not, that says something about them, not me. So hey, who am I? I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm assertive, and I am brave. And if I can start affirming myself and reminding myself of that is who I am, and I start rearrange my thinking patterns and habits around that, I am experiencing an emotion that is more confident. And I'm going to get to that, because often we also feel the fear of the doubt, but yet we can help ourselves by also accessing the confidence of this is who I am, this is the person I am. So then we choose a response out of who we are, not out of a reaction of who somebody else is. And that is how we can create influence. So that is how we can be authentic and not push authenticity, how it's often being sold that we need to be real, and real means, you know, crying and showing emotion and all those kind of things, when it's actually authenticity means that you are vulnerably understanding who you are and leaning into understanding who you are and why you think the certain insecurities you think, to deal with that, have an understanding that that is actually not the truth, and to start affirming what is the truth about me and start living from that truth in that space, instead of living from your insecurities and other people's reactions. So if I say that we should unlearn those untruths, the irrational thinking, that belief stems from formative years. So unfortunately, yes, this comes from our childhood, and the thing is that the frame of reference, and then creating the belief structure. So the frame of reference is only being established in the first 7 to 10 years of a person's life. So that is when we are very little. So you can imagine if that part of the brain, the frame of reference, it's the framework from where we reference life. So if that is still being built, you can imagine why a child is so absorbing. You know, they think everything is awesome and big and massive, and mom and dad is fantastic and super. So you can imagine whenever there is something that happens there, it doesn't have to be traumatic or massive. It can also be, something massive, but it can also be short, continuous experiences in life that you as a child, you don't have the ability, because your framework is not there yet to reference, to think, mom is just in a bad mood. No, unfortunately, when mom yells at you because she's under pressure somewhere else in her life, and she doesn't have the patience to deal with you nagging about something, because children do, or wanting something, or just needing attention from her, and she flips and says, I can't deal with this now, go play, go to your room, or go play. Or even you accidentally, she comes from work, she makes a cup of coffee, she just wants some solitude, but you come there, you come running, you knock over the cup of coffee, and she's like, oh, you stupid child, can't you see where you go? I'm just using examples, that's not incidences. That's not just small incidences. Unfortunately, those incidences, we can't say, oh, mommy is just in a bad mood. Unfortunately, we start thinking, did I do something wrong? So my need of wanting attention is not as important as what mom is busy now with. And unfortunately, those kind of seeds that gets planted into that framework is what builds our belief structure, starting to creating us to believe that perhaps I'm not that important. Perhaps somebody else, is more interesting, or I'm not that valuable. So, in other words, as an adult, that child becomes an adult, and as an adult, that person still references doubts. Okay, so when people do those kind of things, they probably don't find me interesting, so what should I do? So that's the thinking patterns or the coping mechanisms we draw from, especially when we're young, and we build into them. And in this instance, a coping mechanism would be something like, I need to perform, I need to push, I need to show them I can, like academics, like sport, like you need to show you're something. And unfortunately, we then move into an understanding that what I do defines me instead of who I am. And because as a child you learned from those small incidences that who I am ain't enough, because mom wanted to drink her coffee alone and not with me. So who I am is not enough, so I need to do more, be more. And unfortunately, we move into that we are a human being that need to do stuff to get our needs met, which is basic human rights. And unfortunately, when those hurts, continuous experiences, especially when we were young, when we didn't get the affirmation from dad because he was always busy, or we didn't get the attention and the nurturing from mom because she was so busy with making food and bathing us and whatever. So those kind of love connections and belonging connections, those needs aren't settled in our identity. So there's a little bit of a gap. And that's where the thinking pattern starts from. I need to do things. I need to be things to get those needs met, to get affirmed, to get loved, to get belonging. I need to be more, have more, be impressive, perform. And it starts becoming about doing and not being. And unfortunately, that is then how we start living life. And I'm very excited about difficult situations. Not only the one we're in at the moment, because those kind of situations that really challenges us and even threatens us makes us stop and asks of us a question. What are you going to do about your life? So it asks of us, who are you going to be in this life you have? So it's not about us sitting around thinking, what is in it for me in life? No, life is asking you, what do you have in it for life? So what are you bringing to the table? So who are you? How are you going to live that out? Because that is nobody else's responsibility, and that's something you need to own. And that is the empowering thing I want to leave you with, is that if we can really start understanding what are the things that takes us outside of the control of thinking that I am in control, I have responsibility for this life, and I don't have to just be a response to other people or situations behavior. I don't have to just respond to what happens to me. I can decide what I want to be happening in a situation by the way I choose to respond. But that is a journey, and it's the journey of unlearning, what is the lies and the needs that I got neglected in, to start building it into healthy understanding, rational beliefs and truths about who I am, and feeding those affirmations, especially in the moments when I start becoming emotional, threatened, when I start realizing, ooh, this is the rabbit hole that wants to take me to that lie. I can bring it back, unlearn that, speak to it. It's called self-talk. It's speaking to that lie, saying, you know what, that's just because mom spoke about me, or that's how I was raised, it's how I got to think about myself, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not valuable enough, that I'm not important enough, or that I don't add value, that I have to be more. We can start speaking to that, but that's not a lie, because every brain has potential, remember. And we can start affirming that in what way, what if I am, who am I? If I am in my being good enough, if I am, that's what the brain and neuroscience says, if you have the potential. Start discovering that. Have an understanding what it is that makes you feel valuable. Who are you? What is that you feel passionate about? And the reason you feel you are here for. Live that up. That is the value that you add. And that is the affirmations we need to live by. And at the beginning that might, at the beginning of the awareness stages, self-management stages, it can be difficult and it takes a little bit of effort to do it in those moments. But that is where I want to challenge you, is to take some time, reflect in the moment, even in this situation. What about this crisis or this challenging, threatening situation, whatever one you're finding yourself in, what about that is threatening you so? What is it taking you to? What is the belief that you feel that you're doubting and dabbling and dealing with, almost fighting with? What is the need that you think is there, neglected there? And how do you think you're coping? Are you also trying to show yourself, trying to overperform, trying to do things or have things to show that you have status or worth? Is that how you're coping? Because if you can start seeing your irrational root, it would be much more easier to, in the future, start becoming aware of it, pick it up, have an understanding for it, empathizing with it, managing it differently. Realizing with yourself that you have worth, that you can now choose how you want to respond because you have an understanding, you affirm your worth. This is what I'm passionate for, this is what I feel I'm here for, and you choose from that space, you choose how to behave and respond. And sometimes we will still feel the fear, because remember, emotions is a response to what we think. It isn't the only reality. So often because emotions is such a bodily experience, we think it's the reality, but it isn't. So just to understand that we might still feel the fear, but don't let that stop you. Fear is just a uncertainty, so you want to almost talk to the fear, help normalize the fear for yourself, empathize with, yes, I'm feeling fearful, this is a threatening situation for me, this is why it's threatening. Remind yourself, but this is the truth, this is why I want to behave like this in this situation, because I want to be somebody of influence, and I want to show myself and live my passion, or even just live a life of fulfillment, and respond from that. So that is it. Just want to leave you with that. Go and reflect. What about the situation is making you feel threatened, and what do you want to unlearn? What do you want to relearn and affirm? And let me know what you have come up with. Thank you.